saying a few words about the climate change learning module and just highlight a few elements in it. And then Caleb is going to talk about the exercise that has been sent out that extends the Malawi exercise from the basic learning module to a climate change exercise that's very much like what we'll be doing in this phase of the project. And so it's extremely important that everyone works through that exercise and submits your answers to us before we have the Victoria Falls meeting. Because that exercise is really parallels exactly what we'll be doing in this phase of work. So it's really important that everybody is comfortable with all of the steps and procedures for implementing a climate impact and adaptation analysis. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. Let me then just jump to the climate change learning module, and I'm going to start on slide 34. So got it on my screen here, and you can also just follow along on your own machine if you want. So are we okay? Everybody can see my screen? Hopefully everybody can. And Sherry, while I have this on my screen, I can't see the comments from people. So if there's anything that I need to know, just chime in and let me know.
Okay, will do.
So, okay. So if you've worked through the climate change learning module, you've seen some of the concepts developed there. And basically what we're doing is we're using the basic logic of the TOA model to look at two different kinds of effects. One is to look at effects of climate holding constant other factors, and so that's what we'll call a climate impact assessment. And the other thing we're trying to do is to look at the effects of changing technology holding all that. And so the key concept that's conveyed in this slide on that we have on the screen now is this notion of an experimental design. And so the key concept that everybody needs to be familiar with is that when we're doing climate impact assessments or when we're looking at technology or adaptation, what we're doing is we're trying to use our simulation models, the climate models, the crop models, the economic models, to replicate an experimental design where we define a set of conditions and we hold those conditions constant and change one factor, just like we would do if we were doing a classic field experiment, say for a yield trial, where we were trying to look at the effects of different fertilizer application rates on yield, right? So we would set up that field trial, that yield experiment, so that we could isolate the effects of varying fertilizer on yield, holding other factors constant. So in our analyses, there are these three dimensions illustrated here in this graphic: the climate dimension, the technology dimension, and then you can see on the bottom of that figure where it says near future and distant future, also all the other conditions that we include in the RAPs and that we derive from the global scenarios. For example, prices that we derive from global models and the technology trends we get from the global models. So So that's the first point, is that we're trying to construct this experimental design so that we can isolate the effects of either climate or technology under a defined set of either present or future conditions. And corresponding to that, we have defined these core questions that we're trying to answer, and we've structured the analysis around these core questions. Now, one important thing that everybody needs to be familiar with is that in phase one, we defined 3 core questions. And in moving into phase 2, we're going to add an additional question. So there are going to be 4 of these core questions. And so you've seen in this PowerPoint presentation, it's set up to represent the 3 questions as in phase 1. And what I'm going to do now is walk through those and just mention how those core questions have been redefined so that you're familiar with that terminology. So the first core question is what we're calling a climate sensitivity analysis. And you can see highlighted now that we are in the current world, and we are using the existing technology, and we're subjecting that existing system in the current world to a different climate. So we're comparing the current climate versus future climate. So in other words, we're taking today's world, the systems we see right now, and that we can represent with the data we have from the current world, and we're using the crop models to simulate the effects of a changed climate on crop productivity and assessing the effect of that change in crop productivity associated with climate change in the current world. So that's our question 1. And so that question addresses just the impacts of climate changes, holding all else constant in the current world. That's our question 1. Now, you might ask, why do we do that? Because climate change is not really happening, at least not that much in the current world. But this allows us to see just the effects of climate in this current system that we understand today. And it's also useful for comparing to some of the other analyses that we'll be talking about. So the second core question in the phase 1 terminology looks at that same kind of question but moves into the future world. And so you can see now we've highlighted that same kind of comparison moving from current climate to future climate, but we're in the future world, where by future world we mean the conditions defined by a RAP. So for example, we've projected ourselves into the future in terms of different prices, future technology, for example, farm size might change in the future, etc. Now, here's where things perhaps get a little confusing. So we're now going to redefine question 2 as question 3 in phase 2 work. So just keep in mind that we're going to be renumbering these questions. So the numbering of the questions is going to change, but the concepts will remain the same. So don't let the core question numbering confuse you too much. Right now, I'm just going to stay with the numbering we have here in the PowerPoint, but just keep in mind that when we get to Vic Falls, we'll be sort of redefining the numbering of these questions. Core question 3 in phase 1 was looking at adaptations, and you can see in this slide we've highlighted 2 different ways we can look at adaptations. one is in the current world and one is in the future world. And so in phase one, we just talked about the adaptations in the future world. The comparison that's highlighted on the right-hand side of this slide, just above where it says future world. What we're going to be adding into phase two is the current world technology adaptation analysis, which is that light green shaded comparison under above the current world. So that's why we're adding one additional core question in phase two. And so I won't go into the renumbering anymore, but just to make you aware that in phase two there will be these 4 questions corresponding to the old question 1, the old question 2, and then question 3 is going to be redefined now so that we've got adaptations both in the current world and the future world. The reason we're doing that is because, in fact, there's a lot of interest. For example, if you have followed some of the recent developments of the idea of climate-smart agriculture, you know that there we're talking about trying to assess technologies more or less under today's conditions, how well they could perform. So that idea of looking at technologies that might be better adapted to a changing climate, but we're also interested in those technologies, how they would perform in today's conditions, or let's say in the near term, as compared to the much more distant future conditions that most of the climate impact assessment is being done. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly mention the next slide in the CCLM talks about the fact that we can actually think of these measures of impact and vulnerability using the treatment effect concepts that one finds in the economic literature and some other literatures where this kind of experimental design is discussed. So I'm not going to elaborate on that here, but just mention that, and that if you take a look at the advanced learning module, you can see a lot more discussion about these concepts of treatment effects. The next slide just highlights the handbook of methods and procedures that we're using for the regional integrated assessments. We're just in the process of updating that, and should have that, and will have that available for the Victoria Falls meeting. And in that updated version of the handbook, you'll see that the 4 core questions I was just talking about will be, like I said, expanded from 3 questions to 4 questions. And there will be some other just updating of procedures that we'll be using in phase 2. For the economists, it's particularly important to point out Appendix 2 of that handbook, where we define the calculations that we need to make to implement the TOA model to do to analyze the 4 questions. And those methods are the ones that are you'll be using to do the Malawi exercise that Caleb will be talking about in a few minutes.
Hi, John. There's a couple of questions.
Okay, well.
John, can you hear me?
Okay.
There's a couple of questions.
I can.
Is the new one from Levin? Is the new question also going to address current climate variability?
Right. Good question. And the answer is yes. That is part of what we are supposed to be doing in phase 2, is to, that's right, not just look at, in fact, I think that it will be the focus, rather than looking at changes in long-run averages like we usually do in the climate impact assessment. We'll be trying to look more at year-to-year variability. Were there any other questions, Sherry?
Yes, there's one more from Amadou. He wants to know where they find the advanced learning module.
Good question. I yeah, so I guess we haven't. Yeah, sorry about that. I guess we haven't distributed that yet. So that's a good point, Amadou. Thanks for bringing that up. What we decided to do was give you the basic learning module and then the climate change module, so that we didn't overload everybody with too much. But yeah, let me discuss that a bit with Roberto. I think that came with, well, no, I guess we did not distribute that with the model package that we gave everybody, all the new uh, trainees. But I think some folks already have that. So let me discuss that with Roberto. We may just distribute that to everybody at this point. But yeah, so we'll get back to you on that. We just don't want to give people too much to worry about before we have the Vic Falls meeting.
John, can you hear me? This is Alex.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly, I was shouting into a mute microphone a second ago, but
Okay.
to your previous question on the climate variability, the climate and crop teams are going to be spending a lot more time than in phase one looking at kind of what causes the yield to respond to climate factors. And one very nice way of looking at that is in the historical period, looking at year-to-year variability. So we will be examining that. And it also is likely to be a place where we can engage stakeholders to identify the types of years that they may be looking to offset with their adaptation. And many of the adaptations may be aimed more at reducing the worst years than at the average year. So certainly the answer was a resounding yes. We are going to be looking at variability in the historical period and also as it relates to adaptation.
Right. I think the thing I would just add to that is that, to respond to also to Levin's question is that, you know, what we proposed for phase two to DFID was for each team to do something above and beyond what we did in phase one. And so I think one of the things we need to discuss at the Vic Falls meeting is what each team will actually try to take on. And so I don't think it's true that necessarily each team will want to incorporate climate variability in the near term in their economic analysis. But that's something that I think we will be doing, that we will try to do in some cases. And so I think that's kind of a little bit to be discussed at Vic Falls. And that is an aspect of the methodology that, so far we have not incorporated. Well, I just wanted to finish up my comments by mentioning this example that's in the climate change learning module. It comes from a study that Levin and myself and Roberto were involved with, which is very similar to the methodology we are implementing here in phase two. And I'm not going to go through that in detail. I'm just going to mention that it does talk about the relative yield methodology that we're using, talks a little bit about matched and unmatched data that we'll be talking about more in Vic Falls as well. And just walks through some of the steps and illustrates using our gain and loss curve to talk about the gainers and losers and the measuring the extent of vulnerability, the percent of losers. And for example, in this slide, talks a little bit about how the magnitude of gains and losses depends on the heterogeneity in the population. Okay, so and then shows some of the results from that study that again I'm not going to elaborate here to save time. But what I'm going to finish up with now is just to mention this exercise that's in the climate change learning module. So we have two exercises. This first one is really just a simple hypothetical exercise to make sure that you're comfortable with the basic concepts of looking at climate impact and adaptation. And so it's very important that you work through this exercise, and you'll see the system definitions that we provide. And then we ask you to do set up the model and then do these three analyses. The first one is to simulate the impact and vulnerability of climate change without adaptation. The second one is to add in the effects of adaptation to the system. So you essentially are replicating that impact, that climate impact analysis, but adding in creating system 2 with adaptation. And then the third analysis is looking at the rate of adoption. So it's doing an adoption analysis with the adapted technology. Okay, so try to work through that exercise. We give you all the parameters you need, and make sure that you can work through that and submit your answers to our trade-offs team website, and then we'll take a look at those. So the second exercise, after you've done that one, that like I was saying at the beginning of this webinar is very, very important, is to then work through this climate change impacts and adaptation for Malawi exercise that Caleb is now going to talk about. And it was sent out to everyone separately from the climate change learning module. So Caleb, would you like to pick up there and just walk everybody through that exercise?
Yes. Sherry, could you share the screen with me so I can pull up the exercise? But while we're waiting here, I would like to stress to everybody, as all the economists, that this is a very time-intensive exercise, and it's due in a week from today. So please get started on this as soon as you can, because, well, basically, you can't do it in a day. You're going to need more time than a day to do this, and it's also very important because it does mirror what you'll be doing in your analysis for your country. So, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can. It looks good, Caleb.
Okay. So you should all have this PDF document which outlines the full regional integrated assessment in detail. Now, as we scroll down here, you see that we're using the Malawi case study. And in that study, from the BLM, we had two systems, and we were looking at adoption of a high integration crops and aquaculture system. But now, moving to the climate change learning module, we will not be looking at adaptation of this high integration crops and aquaculture system. We're going to be looking at the farms post-adoption. So what we're going to do is we're going to define two stratum, where the first stratum is farms using the low integration aquaculture, agriculture, and the second strata is the farms using high integration. Now, we're starting with what we call a fast track exercise. So this is the same as question 1, but it's a fast track because for our future climate-based technology system, we're only going to have climate impacts affect one crop or one activity. And so this, in this example, for the fast track exercise, Roberto has conveniently written out the steps in detail. And so the climate impacted exercise, sorry, the climate impacted activity is maize. Now if we scroll down here, again, we now have two strata. So stratum 1, these are the farms with a low degree of integration. So in your data file, this will be degree of integration equals 0. And for these farms, the production activities are maize, beans, and fish, or pond. They have small ponds. And so this represents system 1 from the basic learning module, but now it's stratum 1. Then stratum 2, these are the farms with a high integration of crops and aquaculture, or from your data set, degree of integration equals 1. And so they have maize, beans, irrigated vegetables, livestock, and also they have ponds, but they have the larger ponds. Now you should all be looking at the AgMIP handbook on regional integrated assessments to guide you through the calculation of the parameters. But for system 1, this, as you recall, is the current climate and the base technology. So here we're calculating the parameters similarly to what you did in the BLM. But the key difference is this right here, this beta YK, or the normalization factor. So we are normalizing our historical or our observed crop activities or yields by a normalization factor that represents the historical period. So that's going to be the key difference in system 1 in the fast track exercise from what you did in the BLM. And this is written in detail in the handbook. Now for system 2, in this case, you're going to be calculating the climate impacted yields, but you're only going to be doing it for maize. And so in the data set, you'll have simulated data on maize for each farm, and you can use this to calculate the relative yields, and then following the steps in the handbook, calculating the climate impacted parameters for maize. Now, the key to remember here is you're only having maize be impacted by climate. So the other activities will not change from system 1 to system 2. And as we scroll down more, Roberto has given some more detail on how to set up the model. I believe if you work through the BLM, you should be familiar with all of this. And just follow these steps. And then you have questions to work through here. And now please answer all of the questions so that when you submit it, we can look over those. And after the fast track, we move on to the full regional integrated assessment exercise. And so now we are going to be looking at all of the activities being impacted by climate change, not just maize. So the fast track is a way to help you get used to this analysis. And now in the full RIA exercise, it'll be even more intensive. So we're going to do core question 1, where we look at the impact of climate change on our current technology for all activities. So that will really just be a straightforward extension from the fast track. But for core questions 2 and 3, we're going to have to incorporate wraps, trends on price and productivity, and then for core question 3 in particular, an adaptation package. And all of this is in the CCLM information sheet in the data file that Roberto sent out. Well, all of the information needed to do this. So for core question 1, what is the sensitivity of current agricultural production systems to climate change? Like I said, this is the same setup as the fast track, except now you're going to be looking at climate impacts on all activities. So in the data file, there is simulated yields for each farm for maize, beans, and livestock. So for these, you're going to calculate a relative yield for each farm, and then a future climate impacted yield for each farm. However, for vegetables and ponds, we use secondary data to define the mean percentage change in vegetable and fish yields. So here in the additional or the CCLM information, we'll have essentially the same relative yield for every farm. And you'll follow the steps from the fast track exercise to calculate all of your parameters. One thing to note is that this system here, the current climate-based technology, system 1 for core question 1, is the same as it was for the fast track. So what differs is that now system 2, future climate-based technology, includes climate impacts on all activities. And you can follow the steps from the fast track and the handbook to calculate the system 2 parameters. There are some questions based on your results that we would like you to answer. Now moving on to core question 2. What is the impact of climate change on future agricultural productivity or production systems? So you'll notice looking at this diagram that we now have wraps involved in both systems. So this means that we're going to characterize the socioeconomic conditions of the future world. And this is going to affect our price and productivity. There will be trends included, but there's also going to be changes in key variables like farm size that will affect the analysis. And again, in the handbook, there's detailed information on how to go through and calculate the parameters for each system, where essentially the difference between system 1 from core question 1 and system 1 and core question 2 is the price and productivity trends, as well as the changes in variables as indicated by the wraps. And so in this case, one key component is that farm size and household size change. And so if we're looking at yields per hectare, we need to account for changes in the hectares per farm. So yields may change based on productivity trends from the current to the future, but farm size is also going to change. So you need to account for farm size changes based on the wraps before you calculate the per farm parameters. And again, we're going to be looking at the climate impacts on all activities, just as we did in core question 1. And after you calculate your parameters and set up the model, we have questions for you based on your results. Now moving on to core question 3. What are the effects of climate change adaptations in the future world? So now we're moving from a climate change impact analysis into an adoption analysis in the future world. And in this case, the adaptation package is going to introduce a new improved maize variety that will increase maize yields. And the information for this is provided in the data file on exactly how this maize variety will impact maize yields. Now, what you'll notice here is that System 1 in Core Question 3 is the same as System 2 from Core Question 2. In particular, this system right here, the Future Climate-Based Technology and RAPS, you've already calculated all of the parameters for by the time you reach Question 3. The difference then as you move from this system to the adapted maize system is simply a change in maize yields. So you need to calculate the new maize yields with the improved variety and then perform an adoption analysis for Core Question 3. Now finally we have, and there's also questions for Core Question 3, but finally we have an optional Core Question 4, which John mentioned earlier, where we're looking at the effects of climate change adaptations in the current world. So we want to look at this new improved maize variety and how it affects our current climate-based technology system. So again, if we look at System 1 in this case, we've already calculated the parameters for the current climate-based technology. So all you need to do to calculate System 2 for Core Question 4 is to look at the impact of the improved maize variety on this System 1. And this will be very similar calculation process as Core Question 3. And again, this is an adoption analysis, and there are some questions here. So I think I went through all of it. I don't know, do you guys have any questions on the exercise in particular?
So Sherry, any questions? I'm not seeing questions being posted, so you'll have to relay them to us.
There's no current questions right now.
No questions.
Oh, okay. It all must be crystal clear, or else everyone is in shock.
Yeah. Well, I want to stress again, this is due in a week, so please get started on it as soon as you can.
Right. Well, while everyone contemplates any questions they might have, let me mention one other thing that Roberto wanted me to mention. We'll be sending out to everyone very soon a data template that we want you to prepare for the Vic Falls meeting. This is similar to the one we used in phase 1, and basically it's just a set of information about the data you have for the areas that you'll be studying. So this is just so that everybody comes prepared to the Vic Falls meeting with the information you'll need, so that we can be sure that everybody's got the appropriate data they need. So that'll be coming. Right. So as Caleb was emphasizing, as you can see, this is a pretty ambitious exercise, and so we do want to encourage everybody to get started with it, and you know, start working through it, because you probably will have some questions that you may need to ask along the way before you complete it. And so, of course, it won't work very well if you wait to the last day before the exercise is due. So please do get started on this. Well, so no questions.
There is
Clarification
one from Carolyn.
Okay.
Actually, now there's two. Let's see.
Okay, good.
Carolyn says, given the short turnaround time, what should a person do if they get stuck? Is there a designated go-to person or other action they could take?
Right. So I think that's what I was just saying is send us an email and we'll try to respond as quickly as we can. I would say, yeah, Caleb is the go-to person. But Caleb, we've been using, have people been communicating with you via the trade-offs email address or with your own email address?
A little bit of both. So if you send an email to, if you have my email, because I have contacted probably about half of the economists, you can send an email directly to me, or if you send it to the trade-offs, Roberto will be able to either look at it himself or he can forward it to me as well.
Right. Okay, good.
And then,
Sherry, there was another question?
Yep, the Pakistan team asks, will we get the secondary data for normalization from you, or will we have to use the secondary source?
Right. So, and is that question referred to with respect to the exercise or for your own studies? I think they're probably asking about their own analysis. Yeah, so let me just go back and comment on that normalization idea. So the idea there is that we're working with survey data that come from perhaps a single year or maybe several years. And we're trying to use those data to represent the sort of current world period, which, you know, for the crop model simulations is a 30-year period. This starts out in 1980 and goes up to 2010. But our survey data typically are coming from sometime fairly recently. And our basic methodology for doing our climate impact assessments is to say that in terms of socioeconomic data, we're trying to represent the beginning of this century, not the whole period 1980 to 2010. But our survey data probably come from a particular year or a couple of years, and so you know, we have the problem that if we're using, say, a single year's data, there may have been some unusual weather events, there may have been some unusual economic events happening, and so those data may not be as representative of the, you know, what is, you know, we would observe on average, let's say, over the first decade of this century, as we would like. And so this normalization idea is to say, let's look at our survey data and let's look at this sort of base period that we're trying to define, which is the beginning of the century, sort of centered around 2005. You can think of it that way. And if our survey data don't seem to represent that early period as well as what secondary data averaged over the first decade would do, then let's adjust them. So, for example, it might be true that in the, you know, we saw in the first decade of this century, right, that we had some very high prices for some agricultural commodities. Or in some regions, you might have had unusual weather, so that yields were, say, lower than average. And so the point is that we're trying to adjust the data we have, the survey data, so that they're on average representative of this beginning period of the 21st century, so that when we then use that as a basis to project out into the future, we're projecting from this base values that seem representative. So I hope that answered the question. Well, and so specifically to the question, right, so each team will need to find those secondary data from your own region, which are typically available in the form of government statistics, things like regional yields and prices, things like that you can compare your survey data to. Okay, hope that answered that question. But that was a good question. I was hoping somebody would ask that question, because when Caleb mentioned that normalization, I was thinking, aha, this may be a point that we'll need to talk a bit more about. Sherry, any other questions?
Yeah, so also Roberto typed that for the exercise, we provide the data needed to estimate the normalization factor, i.e. historical average yields. So for the exercise, they are provided that data.
Yes,
and then
exactly. Good point.
Justina asked, can you explain further what data we need to come to Vic Falls with?
Right. In fact, I've got, let me quickly try to find that template. Hold on a second. And Sherry, if you can share my show my screen again. So can you guys see my screen? You should see a slide that says project title.
Not yet.
Still loading for me, John.
Okay. Any luck yet?
No.
No. Make sure that you
No?
targeted the screen that you want.
Yeah, sorry. I think I need to, yeah, show my screen. There we go. You guys should have it now.
We got it.
All right, great. Yeah, so here I'll just quickly show you this, this data template that we'll send you. So first slide here just has project title and stuff. So a little bit of information about objectives. I'll skip over this fairly quickly. But then some points about the status of your phase 1 data and data for other regions that you might be including in phase 2. And a table that you can fill out to identify the kinds of data that you'll be using, the region, the crops involved, the source of the data, and so forth, so that we all have a good idea of what data are available. And then just walking through, talking about some of the basic characterization of the systems you'll be looking at. So identifying the population and the strata, how you characterize system 1, and the design of system 2. Some of this for system 2 are probably things that you'll have to be discussing with your teams in terms of, for example, when we're talking about adaptations in particular. And the types of indicator variables that you'll want to be using. And right, I won't go through all the other details here, you'll see there are some examples to illustrate some of this. So I think the key point is that to the extent possible, that everybody can bring summary statistics. Sorry, I'll slide down here, I think, towards the end here. We have some in this template. We'll send you some examples, for example, here for the system 1 parameters. It would be really useful if everybody can bring some summary statistics describing the data they have, things like the farm characteristics, the key crops like yields, costs of production, so that, right, at the Vic Falls meeting, we won't be actually doing a lot of data analysis, but the more information that you can bring of a descriptive nature like this, so that we can see the kind of data you're planning to use, the better it will be. Hope that answers that question.
And there's another question from Shoman. I seem not to be getting the percent of gainers and losers as a curve/figure. Is it the model aspect? And then parentheses, Givius.
So is that in terms of the exercise in the climate change learning module?
Hey, John, I saw the question. I think I would say two things. So for Givius, part of that is going to be answered or explained, I guess, in the climate change learning module PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you work through that, you'll see that more, and it will explain, how the figure that you see, what you learned in the BLM was an adoption curve. It will explain how that in the climate change impact analysis shows gainers and losers.
Right. So maybe what I can suggest is, shoot us an email with the question if there's a need to elaborate a bit more on that question. We probably shouldn't digress on specific questions about the exercises here and now. Sherry, any other questions?
Yep. OU Anthony says, if you have panel data for the same households for 3 years within a time period of about 7 years, does this provide a significant advantage in doing the normalization calculations?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer, I think, is yes. So that's right. To the extent we can have more years of data, so a panel over a longer time period, then the better we can hope to average out effects of individual years, and that's what we really want to be able to do to the extent we can. So yeah, panel data are good, and actually in Vic Falls we'll be talking a bit more about some other aspects of using panel data if we have them available. So yeah, the basic point is, if you do have panel data available, we definitely want to make use of that. Okay, any others?
Looks like that's it for now.
Well, it looks like our time is just about up. I guess we were scheduled for 1 hour, Sherry?
Yep, that's correct. And
my computer clock says it's 1 minute before the hour, so I think we did a good job of coming in right in on time. Okay, well, looking forward to seeing everybody in Victoria Falls. Should be a great opportunity to reconnect with everybody from Phase 1 and welcome in new folks who are participating in Phase 2. So work hard the next week. We look forward to hearing from you about your exercises. Send us questions if you have some as you work through the exercises. Any final words of wisdom, Caleb?
I would just once again strongly encourage you to get working on this early and send us questions if you have anything.
Okay, very good. Okay, Sherry, I think we better wrap it up here. Thanks, everybody, for participating.